Proportional representation is an idea whose time has come.
We need to make sure everyone's votes counts. People's votes are often wasted in our current system and they get ignored by those in power. We need to put power into people's hands.
We urgently need to rebuild trust in our democracy and ensure that everybody's vote counts equally.
It is very much my view that our outdated first-past-the-post electoral system is not fit for purpose, and we will campaign with anyone and everyone to change this electoral system.
The UK's political system is under increasing strain. 5 Prime Ministers in 4 years tells you part of that story. But what, if anything, could be done to make the system more stable? One proposal has been debated for decades, replacing the UK's first-past-the-post voting system. Small parties have long argued that it gives Labour and the Conservatives an overwhelming advantage, helping them dominate British politics for much of the past century. The most commonly suggested alternative is some form of proportional representation. Across Europe, it is the norm. In fact, when it comes to electing the main national parliament, the UK is one of the few countries not to use a proportional system, but at least they have Belarus for company. However, before we look at any electoral reform, I wanted to have a full understanding of the system that has elected generations upon generations of governments in the United Kingdom. So, how does first past the post actually work? On the surface, it's incredibly simple. The 4 nations are divided into 650 constituencies, and on election day, each constituency elects 1 member of parliament. Voters place a single cross next to their preferred candidate, and whoever receives the most votes wins. It doesn't matter whether they win by 1 vote or 20,000. You don't need a majority, just more votes than everyone else. Supporters argue that's exactly why it works. It's simple to understand, quick to count, and usually produces a clear winner. More often than not, one party gains enough seats to govern alone, avoiding the lengthy coalition negotiations that are common in countries using proportional representation. Every MP also represents a specific local area, giving constituents someone they can contact directly with local issues. But simplicity comes with trade-offs. But what are they? The biggest criticism is that first past the post doesn't always translate votes into seats fairly, because every constituency is effectively a winner-takes-all contest. Millions of votes can then have little impact on the final result. If your preferred candidate finishes second, every one of those votes counts for nothing when it comes to winning representation in Parliament. The 2024 general election highlighted this better than almost any election in modern British history. Labour won around 34% of the national vote, yet secured over 60% of the seats in the House of Commons, giving the party a commanding parliamentary majority. Meanwhile, Reform UK received around 14% of the vote across the country, making it one of the most supported parties nationally, but they only won 5 seats. This equates to 820,745 votes per MP elected. Quite the difference from Labour, who received 23,605 votes per MP. Liberal Democrats won more than 70 seats, with roughly 13% of the vote, because their support was concentrated in particular areas, while parties with similar or even larger national vote shares won far fewer MPs because their voters were spread more evenly across the country. To put into context once more, Reform came runners-up in 98 constituencies, meaning these votes counted for nothing. Now I know what you're thinking. That seems like an awful lot of flaws for a system that has been used for centuries and it has made much of our many British governments. But supporters argue that this isn't a flaw, but a feature. They say first past the post creates decisive governments that can implement their manifesto without being held hostage by coalition partners. They also argue that it tends to keep out extremist parties and it provides clear accountability. If a government performs badly, voters know exactly who to remove at the next election. Critics see it very differently, however. They argue that it exaggerates victories, punishes smaller parties, and it leaves millions of people feeling their vote doesn't really count. Safe seats can become almost impossible to change, while elections are often decided by a relatively small number of marginal constituencies, rather than the country as a whole. So the debate comes down to one question. What's more important? Stable governments that can act decisively, or a parliament that more accurately reflects how people voted? That question lies at the heart of the argument, and that argument is with proportional representation. But what would that look like in a UK system? But first, we need to understand what proportional representation all PR actually is. Put simply, PR is designed to make the share of seats a party wins in Parliament roughly match its share of the vote. Take the 2024 general election. Labour won around 34% of the vote, so under a perfectly proportional system, you'd expect them to hold roughly 34% of the seats. Reform UK won around 14%, so you'd expect them to hold roughly 14% also. That means far more votes actually contribute towards the final makeup of Parliament, rather than having little or no impact like under first past the post. The difference is simple. First past the post asks, who won the most votes in each constituency? PR asks, what proportion of votes supported each party, and does Parliament reflect that? But switching to PR isn't quite that simple, because PR isn't one voting system. There are actually a number you can choose from. So what could proportional representation actually look like in Britain? Party list proportional representation is one possible alternative to Britain's first past the post system. Under party list, large constituencies elect several MPs. Each party presents a list of candidates, and the number elected from each party broadly reflects its share of the vote. For example, if an area elects 10 MPs and a party receives 30% of the vote, it should win approximately 3 seats. In a closed list system, the party decides the order of its candidates. However, in an open list system, voters can influence which candidates are elected. The main advantage is fairness. A party receiving 20% of the vote should gain roughly 20% of the seats. This would have produced a very different result in 2024. Labour probably still would have been the largest party, but it would have been unlikely to win a majority on its own. Reform and the Greens would have gained significantly more representation. Party lists also reduce wasted votes. On first past the post, votes for losing candidates have no effect on the national result. Under party lists, most votes contribute towards electing someone. It can also help smaller parties and produce a parliament that represents a wider range of political views. Parties can arrange their lists to improve the representation of women and minority groups. However, there are disadvantages. Closed lists give party leaders considerable power because they decide which candidates receive the highest positions. MPs might therefore feel more accountable to their party than to voters. Party lists can also weaken the local constituency link. Instead of having one clearly identifiable MP, voters may be represented by several MPs covering a much larger area. Proportional systems also make coalition governments more likely. Supporters argue that coalitions encourage compromise, but critics say they can be unstable and allow smaller parties to gain disproportionate influence. In Britain, groups such as the Electoral Reform Society and Make Votes Matter campaign are strongly for proportional representation, as are the Liberal Democrats, Greens, Reform UK, SNP and Plaid Cymru, who all support replacing the first past the post system, although some prefer systems such as the single transferable vote, which we'll get onto shortly. Versions of party lists are already used in countries including the Netherlands, South Africa, Sweden, Spain, Denmark and Finland. Ultimately, party lists would make Parliament much more closely reflect how people voted in 2024. However, this greater proportionality could come at the cost of stronger party control, a weaker constituency link and more coalition government. The central question, again, is simple. Should an electoral system prioritise decisive governments, or should it represent every vote as accurately as possible? Party list is not the only way of making election results more proportional. Another option is the single transferable vote, usually shortened to STV. The crucial difference is that party list focuses on political parties, while STV gives voters greater control over individual candidates. Under STV, several MPs are elected in each constituency. Instead of placing one cross on the ballot, voters rank the candidates, 1 for their first choice, 2 for their second, 3 for their third, and so on. Voters do not have to rank every candidate. They can support candidates from one party or rank people from several different parties. To win, a candidate must reach a certain number of votes, known as the quota. Once someone reaches that quota, they are elected. If they receive more votes than they need, the surplus is transferred, according to voters' later preferences. The candidate with the fewest votes is then eliminated, and their votes are transferred as well. This continues until all seats have been filled. This means a vote is less likely to be wasted. If someone's first choice cannot win, or already has enough support, their vote can still help elect another candidate. STV could also address some of the problems highlighted by the 2024 general election. Parties such as Reform UK and the Greens, whose votes were spread across the country, would have a better chance of gaining representation. However, STV would not make the national result perfectly proportional. The outcome would depend on the size of each constituency and the number of MPs elected in it. Generally, the more representatives elected in each area, the more proportional the result becomes. A major strength of STV is voter choice. Under a closed party list system, political parties decide which candidates are most likely to be elected. Under STV, voters make that decision themselves. It also allows people to distinguish between candidates from the same party. Someone might support a party's policies, but prefer one of its candidates over another. There are disadvantages. The counting process is much more complicated and it can take much longer. Constituencies would also have to become much larger, potentially weakening the connection between MPs and particular towns or communities. Having several MPs for one constituency could give voters more representatives to approach, but it might also make responsibility less clear. STV is supported by the Electoral Reform Society, Liberal Democrats, SNP and Plaid Cymru. It is used nationally in the Republic of Ireland and Malta. It is also used for elections in Northern Ireland and for local elections in Scotland. So compared with party list, STV offers proportionality without giving parties complete control over who is elected. The choice between them comes down to where power should lie, primarily with political parties or with voters choosing between individual candidates. So, is Britain's electoral system broken? The 2024 general election exposed a major weakness in first past the post. Labour won almost 2/3 of the seats with just 33.7% of the vote, while millions of Reform and Green voters gained very little representation. Supporters argue that first past the post still delivers clear results, strong governments and a direct link between each MP and their constituency. But party lists and STV show that alternatives are available. Party lists would make seats more closely match each party's vote share, while STV would also allow voters to rank individual candidates. Both could reduce wasted votes, although they would make coalitions more common and elections more complicated. Whether the system is broken depends on what elections should achieve. If the priority is producing decisive governments, it continues to work. But if every vote should carry similar influence, the 2024 result suggests Britain's system is no longer fit for purpose. But what should change? And is it time for proportional representation?